David Rodriguez had always been different from other guys his age. While his friends spent weekends at bars or playing video games, he found himself volunteering at the local community center. Something about helping kids just felt right to him. Maybe it was because he grew up without a father himself, or maybe it was just who he was meant to be. At 35, David had built a successful career as a software engineer. His small apartment was neat and organized, filled with books about parenting and child development that he'd been collecting for years. His friends often teased him about it. "When are you going to get married and have kids the normal way?" they'd ask. But David knew his path was different. The idea of adoption had been growing in his heart for months. Every time he saw kids at the community center who didn't have stable homes, something inside him ached. He'd watch them do their homework alone or eat snacks by themselves while other kids got picked up by loving parents. David wanted to be that person for someone. One cold Thursday morning, David finally made the call to the local adoption agency. His hands were shaking as he dialed the number. The woman on the phone was kind and patient, explaining the long process ahead. Home visits, background checks, parenting classes, and endless paperwork. David didn't care. He was ready. The first few months were a whirlwind of preparation. David took parenting classes every Tuesday evening, learning about child psychology and trauma-informed care. He read books about different cultures and attended workshops about raising children who looked different from him. Some people thought he was overthinking it, but David knew this wasn't just about providing a roof over someone's head. It was about giving kids the love and stability they deserved. His social worker, Mrs. Patterson, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had seen it all. She warned David about the challenges ahead. "Single parenting is hard enough," she said during one of their meetings. "Add in the complexities of transracial adoption, and you're looking at a whole different level of responsibility." David listened carefully to every word. He wasn't naive about the challenges, but he felt called to this path. Something deep inside told him he was meant to be a father, even if it wasn't happening the traditional way. After 6 months of preparation, Mrs. Patterson finally called with news. "I have 2 brothers I'd like you to meet," she said. "They've been in the system for 3 years, and finding a home willing to take siblings has been challenging." David's heart started racing. 2 children? He had imagined adopting 1 child, but the thought of keeping brothers together felt even more important. He knew from his own childhood how much siblings meant to each other. The drive to the foster care facility felt like the longest 20 minutes of David's life. He had no idea what to expect. Would the kids like him? Would he know what to say? All his preparation suddenly felt inadequate. When he walked into the small meeting room, 2 boys were sitting at a table coloring. The older one, about 8 years old, looked up with cautious eyes. The younger boy, maybe 6, kept his head down, focused on staying inside the lines of his coloring book. "Boys, this is Mr. Rodriguez," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "He's hoping to meet you today." The older boy, who Mrs. Patterson introduced as Jerome, was clearly the protector. He sat up straighter and studied David carefully. "Are you here to adopt us?" he asked directly. No beating around the bush. David was struck by the maturity in such a young voice. "I'm hoping we might be a good match," he said honestly. "What do you think about that?" Jerome shrugged, but David could see the hope trying to hide behind his careful expression. The younger boy, Kevin, finally looked up. His eyes were bright and curious, but there was sadness there too. "Do you have a big house?" Kevin asked quietly. "It's not huge," David admitted, "but it's got 2 bedrooms and a nice yard, and there's a park right down the street with swings and a basketball court." For the next hour they talked and colored together. David learned that Jerome loved science and building things with his hands. Kevin was artistic and loved music. They told him about their favorite foods and the cartoons they liked to watch. Slowly the walls started coming down. What really got to David was how Jerome looked after his little brother. He made sure Kevin had enough crayons and helped him when he couldn't spell a word. These boys had been taking care of each other through who knows what kind of difficult situations. As the visit ended, Mrs. Patterson walked David to his car. "They haven't opened up like that to anyone in months," she said. "Jerome especially has been very protective and distant with potential families." David's mind was made up before he even got home. That night he called Mrs. Patterson and told her he wanted to move forward. The boys needed a home, and he needed them just as much. The legal process took 8 more months. During that time, David visited Jerome and Kevin every week. They'd go to the park, play games, or just talk. Gradually, David started to understand their story. Their mother had passed away when Kevin was just 3. They'd been bounced between different foster homes, sometimes staying together, sometimes separated. The fear in their eyes whenever separation was mentioned broke David's heart. David used those months to prepare his home and his life. He painted the second bedroom in bright colors and filled it with bunk beds, books, and toys. He researched schools in diverse neighborhoods and found a place across town that seemed perfect. It would mean a longer commute for him, but giving the boys the best chance at fitting in was worth it. He also spent time learning about their cultural background, reading books by Black authors and connecting with mentors who could help guide him. David knew he couldn't replace their cultural identity, but he could support it and help them feel proud of who they were. The night before the adoption was finalized, David couldn't sleep. He walked around his apartment, looking at the children's drawings now covering his refrigerator and the extra shoes by the front door. Tomorrow, he would officially become a father to 2 amazing boys who had already changed his life completely. When the judge declared the adoption final, Jerome and Kevin were sitting beside David in their best clothes. As the gavel came down, Kevin reached over and took David's hand. Jerome, trying to be tough, wiped away a tear he thought no one would notice. Walking out of that courthouse, David felt like his real life was just beginning. He had no idea that the biggest challenges were still ahead of them, but in that moment nothing else mattered. He was finally a dad, and Jerome and Kevin finally had their forever home. The 3 of them went out for ice cream to celebrate, talking excitedly about their new adventure together. David looked at his boys and felt his heart swell with love and pride. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. The moving truck pulled away from the curb on Maple Street, leaving David and his 2 boys staring at their new home. The house was perfect, a cozy 2-story with a big front yard and mature oak trees providing shade. The neighborhood looked like something from a movie, with well-maintained lawns and children's bikes scattered on driveways. "This is really ours?" Kevin asked, his eyes wide as he looked up at the house. "Really ours," David confirmed, ruffling his hair. "Come on, let's go explore." Jerome was already running toward the backyard, and David felt a surge of happiness watching his boys get excited about their new home. He'd chosen Willowbrook specifically for its excellent schools and safe streets. The research had taken months, but this seemed like the perfect place to build their life together. The first few days were a blur of unpacking boxes and getting settled. David enrolled the boys in the local elementary school and introduced himself to the principal, Mrs. Foster. She seemed welcoming enough, though David noticed a slight hesitation when she met Jerome and Kevin. "We're always happy to have new students," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sure they'll fit right in." The first real sign of trouble came at the grocery store that Saturday. David was pushing a cart while Jerome and Kevin debated the merits of different breakfast cereals. They were laughing and being typical kids when David noticed 2 women at the end of the aisle whispering and staring. "I just think it's strange," one of them said in a voice loud enough to be heard. "A single man adopting 2 black children? What's he really trying to prove?" David felt his stomach drop, but he tried to ignore it. He kept his focus on his boys, who thankfully hadn't heard the comment. But as they moved through the store, more whispers followed them. David found himself second-guessing every interaction, wondering if the cashier's cold tone was just her having a bad day or something more. That afternoon, while the boys played in the backyard, David's new neighbor approached the fence. Robert Chen seemed friendly enough at first, introducing himself and welcoming David to the neighborhood. "Great to have new people," Robert said. "Though I have to ask, are those boys yours?" The question hung in the air awkwardly. David straightened up. "Yes, they're my sons. I adopted them." Robert nodded slowly, but David could see the wheels turning in his head. "Well, that's very generous of you." I'm sure that was quite an adjustment for everyone involved. The conversation ended quickly after that, leaving David feeling unsettled. Over the next few weeks, similar interactions became a pattern. Neighbors would smile politely but keep conversations brief. When David introduced himself at the boys' school functions, other parents would nod and then find reasons to end the conversation. The real problem started about a month into the school year. Jerome came home upset one day. His usual confident demeanor cracked. "Some kids at school said I don't belong here," he told David quietly. "They said their parents told them that white people and black people shouldn't live together." David felt his heart break a little. He sat down next to Jerome and chose his words carefully. "What do you think about what they said?" "I think they're wrong," Jerome said, but his voice wavered. "You're my dad now. That's what the judge said." "That's exactly right," David replied, pulling his son into a hug. "And don't let anyone tell you different." But the incidents kept happening. Kevin came home asking why some parents wouldn't let their kids play with him at recess. A few times, David caught other parents pointing and whispering when he picked the boys up from school. The worst part was the anonymous letters that started appearing in their mailbox. The first one accused David of playing savior for attention. Another suggested he was confused about his role as a white man. The messages were cruel and cowardly, always unsigned. Things escalated when Margaret Wellington, the neighborhood association president, organized what she called a community meeting at her house. David wasn't invited, but word got around about what was discussed. Concerns about property values and maintaining community standards were raised. Several people questioned whether David's situation was appropriate for their family-friendly neighborhood. David learned about the meeting from his neighbor across the street, Linda Morrison, who had attended and felt uncomfortable with the whole thing. "I wanted you to know what was being said," Linda told him as they stood in his driveway. "Not everyone feels that way, but some people are pretty upset about you and the boys being here." "Upset about what exactly?" David asked, though he knew the answer. Linda looked uncomfortable. "They think you're making some kind of political statement. Margaret keeps talking about how this affects everyone's home values, and how it's not fair to expose their children to complicated family dynamics." That night, David lay awake wondering if he'd made a mistake. Not about adopting Jerome and Kevin. That was the best decision he'd ever made. But maybe this wasn't the right neighborhood for them. Maybe he should have chosen somewhere more diverse, somewhere they wouldn't stand out so much. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. David was getting ready for work when Kevin ran into the house crying. Jerome was right behind him, his fists clenched in anger. "Someone wrote something mean on our garage," Kevin sobbed. David's blood ran cold as he walked outside. Spray painted across their garage door in red letters were the words, "Go back where you belong." Standing there looking at the hateful message, David felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak. His boys were watching him, waiting to see how he would react. In that moment, David made a choice that would define their future. Instead of calling the police right away, he went to the garage and got a bucket of paint. "Come on, boys," he said. "Let's cover this up together." As they painted over the cruel words, David explained that some people were afraid of things they didn't understand. "But we're not going anywhere," he told them firmly. "This is our home and we have every right to be here." Jerome, holding a paintbrush with determination, looked up at his dad. "Are we going to fight back?" David considered the question carefully. "We're going to show them who we really are," he said. "And we're going to do it with kindness and strength. Sometimes that's the best way to fight." That afternoon, David called Mrs. Patterson, his former social worker, needing someone to talk to who understood their situation. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said after hearing about everything that had happened. "This is harder than most families face. But running away won't solve anything. Those boys need to see that you're strong enough to stand up for your family." David knew she was right. Jerome and Kevin had already lost so much in their young lives. They needed to see that their new family was worth fighting for, and that they belonged wherever love existed. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, David made a promise to his boys. "We're going to stay," he said, "and we're going to show this neighborhood what a real family looks like." The battle for acceptance was just beginning, but David was ready to fight for his sons and their place in the community. He had no idea how long it would take or what it would cost them. But giving up wasn't an option. Outside their window, Maple Street looked peaceful in the evening light. But David knew the real test of their strength as a family was just getting started. David stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, practicing what he wanted to say at tonight's school board meeting. Word had gotten out that the meeting would address family values in our community, but everyone knew it was really about his family. Margaret Wellington had been busy rallying support for what she called traditional family structures. "Dad, are you nervous?" Jerome appeared in the doorway, his backpack slung over his shoulder, ready for another day at school. David turned and smiled at his son. Over the past few months, Jerome had grown more confident, but David could still see the worry in his eyes. A little nervous, David admitted. But sometimes we have to speak up for what's right, even when it's scary. The past 3 months had been a roller coaster. After the garage incident, David had made some important decisions. Instead of hiding from the community's hostility, he chose to engage with it head-on. He started by enrolling both boys in karate classes across town, wanting them to build confidence and learn self-defense. "Why do we have to learn to fight?" Kevin had asked on their first day at the dojo. "We're not learning to fight," David explained. "We're learning to be strong and confident. Sometimes that's all you need." Master Liu, the instructor, was a small man with kind eyes who understood their situation without needing explanation. "Confidence comes from within," he told the boys. "When you know who you are, no one can make you feel small." David also started volunteering with the local Little League, despite knowing he wasn't exactly welcome. When he first approached Coach Williams about Jerome joining the team, the man's hesitation was obvious. "Well, we're pretty full this season," Coach Williams had said, looking uncomfortable. "The season hasn't started yet," David replied politely, "and I'd be happy to volunteer as an assistant coach. I played baseball in college." Put on the spot, Coach Williams couldn't refuse without being obviously discriminatory. David's persistence paid off. After a few practices, even the most skeptical parents had to admit that David knew his stuff and that Jerome was a natural athlete. Kevin found his own path through the church choir. Despite not being regular churchgoers, David had noticed that Kevin hummed constantly and had a beautiful voice. When he heard about auditions for the children's choir at the community church, he encouraged Kevin to try out. The choir director, Mrs. Anderson, was a woman in her 60s who seemed to judge people only by their character and talent. When Kevin opened his mouth to sing, the whole room went quiet. His voice was pure and powerful, filling the space with unexpected beauty. "That boy has a gift," Mrs. Anderson told David after the audition. "We'd be honored to have him in our choir." Slowly, things began to shift. At baseball practice, David's knowledge and patient coaching style started winning over some of the other parents. When Jerome made an incredible diving catch during their first game, even the most critical observers had to applaud. "Your boy's got real talent," one father, Mike Peterson, told David after the game. Mike had been one of the most vocal skeptics at the beginning of the season. "Thanks," David replied. "Jerome works really hard." Mike nodded, seeming to see David and Jerome differently for the first time. "My boy could learn a thing or two from his dedication." These small victories gave David hope, but he knew the real battle was still ahead. The school board meeting had been called after several parents complained about what they saw as the disruption his family was causing in the school environment. That evening, the school auditorium was packed. David could feel eyes on him as he walked in with Jerome and Kevin. They sat in the third row, right where everyone could see them. David wanted the board to put faces to the family they were discussing. Margaret Wellington was the first to speak during the public comment period. She was polished and articulate, talking about maintaining the values that make our community special and ensuring that all families fit the standards that have made our schools successful. She never mentioned David's family directly, but everyone knew what she meant. Several other parents spoke in support of her position, using careful language that skirted around what they really wanted to say. When David's turn came, he walked to the microphone with his heart pounding. He had prepared remarks, but looking out at all those faces, he decided to speak from his heart instead. "My name is David Rodriguez," he began. "These are my sons, Jerome and Kevin. 3 months ago, we moved to Willowbrook because I wanted to give my boys the best education and the safest community I could find." He paused, looking directly at Margaret Wellington. "We've faced some challenges since we arrived. Some people have questioned our right to be here. They've questioned whether my family fits their idea of what a family should look like." David's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Let me tell you about my family. Jerome gets up every morning and helps his little brother get ready for school. He's maintained a 3.8 GPA while adjusting to a new home and dealing with people who make him feel unwelcome. Last week, he spent his own allowance money buying lunch for a classmate who forgot his lunch money." Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. David continued. "Kevin volunteers to read to the kindergarten class during his free time. He's never missed a choir practice, even when other kids have made fun of him for being different." Last month, he organized his class to make get-well cards for their substitute teacher, who was in the hospital. David's voice cracked slightly. These boys have been through more hardship in their young lives than most adults will ever face. They've lost their mother, been separated from family, and bounced between homes where they weren't really wanted. Despite all of that, they choose kindness every single day. The auditorium had gone completely quiet. David could see some people wiping their eyes. "I'm not asking for special treatment," David said. "I'm asking for the same thing every parent wants. For my children to be judged by their character, not by the color of their skin or the circumstances of how they became my sons." He looked around the room one more time. "If that doesn't fit your idea of family values, then maybe it's time to reconsider what values really matter." David walked back to his seat to scattered applause. Jerome reached over and squeezed his hand, and Kevin leaned against his shoulder. The school board voted unanimously to reaffirm their commitment to welcoming all families in the district. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. After the meeting, several people approached David. Linda Morrison, his neighbor, introduced him to her husband Tom. "We should have reached out sooner," she said. "We'd love to have you all over for dinner sometime." Even more surprising was when Mike Peterson, the baseball dad, came over with his family. "My wife Janet has been wanting to meet you," he said, "and our son Alex has been asking if Jerome can come over to play." As they walked to the car that night, Kevin looked up at David. "Dad, did we win?" David thought about the question. They hadn't changed everyone's mind, and there would still be challenges ahead. But something important had shifted tonight. "We showed them who we are," David said. "Sometimes that's the most important victory of all." Jerome, walking beside them, added quietly, "I'm proud we're a family." David felt tears prick his eyes. After months of doubt and difficulty, his boys were starting to believe they truly belonged. The fight wasn't over, but they were no longer fighting alone. Back home on Maple Street, their house looked different somehow. The flowers David had planted in the front yard were starting to bloom, and a basketball hoop he'd installed was getting regular use from neighborhood kids who were finally starting to warm up to Jerome and Kevin. It would take time, but David could feel the tide beginning to turn. Love and persistence were slowly breaking down the walls of prejudice, one neighbor at a time. The sound of laughter echoed from the Rodriguez backyard as Jerome pitched a baseball to his little brother. It had been 6 months since the school board meeting, and slowly but surely things were changing on Maple Street. David watched from the kitchen window as 3 neighborhood kids had joined the impromptu game, including Alex Peterson, whose father had once been openly hostile toward their family. "Mr. Rodriguez?" Kevin appeared at his elbow, still wearing his choir robes from Sunday service. "Mrs. Anderson wants to know if I can sing a solo at the Christmas concert. She says I have a special gift." David's heart swelled with pride. "What do you think about that?" "I'm nervous," Kevin admitted, "but I want to try. She said it's a song about bringing people together." The irony wasn't lost on David. 6 months ago, his family had been the source of division in the community. Now his son might be the one helping to unite. The real turning point had come 3 weeks earlier during what the kids called the food drive incident. Jerome had noticed that some of his classmates weren't eating lunch regularly. Instead of just feeling bad about it, he decided to do something. "Dad, can we start collecting food for kids who don't have enough?" Jerome had asked one evening over dinner. David had been amazed by his son's initiative. "That's a big project, buddy. How would you want to organize it?" Jerome had thought it through completely. He wanted to set up collection boxes at school and around the neighborhood, then deliver the food to families who needed it. What started as his school project quickly grew into something much bigger. Margaret Wellington had been one of Jerome's first stops when he started going door to door asking for donations. David had wanted to go with him, but Jerome insisted he could handle it himself. "Mrs. Wellington," Jerome had said politely when she answered her door, "I'm collecting food for families in our community who are struggling. Would you like to contribute?" Margaret had stood there staring at this determined young boy who had every reason to dislike her, but was treating her with complete respect. Later, she told her husband it was one of the most humbling moments of her life. "What kind of food are you looking for?" she had asked quietly. Jerome had pulled out a carefully written list. "Canned goods, pasta, rice, things that last a long time. My dad helped me research what families need most." Margaret had not only filled a bag with donations, she had asked if she could help with the project. By the end of the week, she was coordinating with the local grocery store to get bulk donations and organizing other parents to help with distribution. The project's success had surprised everyone. They collected enough food to help 15 families, including some right in their own neighborhood, who had been struggling quietly. When Jerome presented the results to his class, even the kids who had been mean to him earlier in the year applauded. But it was the Wellington family's personal crisis that really changed everything. Margaret's teenage daughter, Ashley, had been struggling with depression and her grades had plummeted. The family was dealing with their own challenges behind the carefully maintained facade of their perfect life. David had noticed Ashley sitting alone at the bus stop looking miserable several mornings in a row. His instinct was to help despite everything Margaret had put his family through. "Jerome," David said one morning, "would you mind walking with Ashley to the bus stop? She looks like she could use a friend." Jerome had looked at his dad like he was crazy. "Dad, her mom has been really mean to us." "I know," David replied, "but that doesn't mean Ashley has been. Sometimes people who seem unfriendly are just hurting inside." Jerome had reluctantly agreed, and to everyone's surprise, he and Ashley quickly became friends. Jerome's natural leadership and kindness were exactly what Ashley needed during her difficult time. He helped her with math homework, included her in activities with his friends, and most importantly, treated her with the same respect he showed everyone. The change in Ashley was dramatic. Her grades improved. She started smiling again, and she began standing up to kids at school who made negative comments about Jerome's family. When someone made a racist joke in her presence, Ashley shut it down immediately. "That's my friend you're talking about," she told them firmly. "And he's a better person than any of you." Margaret watched her daughter's transformation with amazement and growing guilt. The boy she had tried to drive out of the neighborhood was helping save her family. The breaking point came when Ashley got accepted into the advanced math program, something that wouldn't have happened without Jerome's patient tutoring. "I need to apologize," Margaret told David when she found him in his driveway one Saturday morning. David looked up from washing his car, genuinely surprised. "You don't need to do anything, Mrs. Wellington." "Yes, I do," Margaret said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been terrible to you and your boys. I let fear and prejudice guide my actions, and I'm ashamed of myself." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Jerome saved my daughter, not just her grades, her spirit. She was in a dark place, and your son's kindness brought her back to us. I don't know how to thank you for raising such an incredible kid." David set down his sponge and really looked at Margaret for the first time. Behind her perfectly styled exterior, he saw a mother who had been struggling just like everyone else. "Jerome's just being himself," David said gently. "But I appreciate you saying that." "I want to make things right," Margaret continued. "I've been talking to the other parents, trying to undo some of the damage I caused. Most people are ready to move on. They've seen who you and your boys really are." The conversation was interrupted by laughter from the backyard, where Jerome was teaching Ashley and several other kids how to throw a proper curveball. The sight brought tears to Margaret's eyes. "They look happy," she said. "Kids forgive easier than adults," David replied. "Maybe we could all learn from them." Over the following weeks, the neighborhood dynamics shifted dramatically. Parents who had been cold began waving when David picked up his boys from school. Invitations to birthday parties started arriving. Other kids began asking if they could join the baseball games in the Rodriguez backyard. The most touching moment came when Kevin performed his solo at the Christmas concert. Standing in front of the packed auditorium, his clear voice filled the space with a song about love conquering fear. As the last note faded, the entire audience rose in a standing ovation. Margaret Wellington was crying openly, as were many others who remembered how they had treated this family just months earlier. After the concert, parents lined up to congratulate David and tell him how talented his son was. Mrs. Anderson, the choir director, pulled David aside. "That boy has something special," she said. "Not just his voice, but his heart. You should be very proud." Walking home that night, with Jerome carrying his little brother on his shoulders and neighbors calling out Merry Christmas from their porches, David felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The journey had been difficult, but they had made it through together. "Dad," Jerome said as they reached their front door, "do you think we belong here now?" David looked around at their neighborhood, where Christmas lights twinkled in windows and their own decorations reflected their family's journey, a mix of traditions they had created together. I think we always belonged here, David said. It just took everyone else a little time to see it. Kevin, still perched on Jerome's shoulders, pointed to a house across the street where the Peterson family was hanging a banner that read, "Welcome home, Rodriguez family." "Look, Dad," Kevin said with wonder in his voice. "They made a sign for us." Standing there on their front porch, surrounded by the acceptance they had fought so hard to earn, David realized that home wasn't just about the place you lived. It was about the people who chose to love you, no matter what. 5 years later, David stood in the same auditorium where he had once defended his family's right to belong. This time, he was here to watch Jerome accept the award for Student Council President and to see Kevin receive recognition for his music scholarship to the State Youth Orchestra. The transformation felt like a dream. "Ladies and gentlemen," Principal Foster announced, "please welcome our Student Council President, Jerome Rodriguez." The applause was thunderous as Jerome walked to the podium. At 13, he had grown tall and confident, but David could still see traces of that cautious 8-year-old who had asked him if he was there to adopt them. "Thank you for this honor," Jerome began, his voice clear and strong. "When my family first moved to Willowbrook, I wasn't sure we belonged here. Some people made it clear they didn't want us, but my dad taught me something important. We don't earn our place by changing who we are. We earn it by showing who we are." David felt tears prick his eyes as his son continued. "This community taught me that people can change, that fear can become friendship, and that families come in all different shapes and colors. I want to use this position to make sure every new student feels welcome here, no matter what they look like or where they come from." The standing ovation lasted several minutes. David noticed Margaret Wellington in the front row, clapping with tears streaming down her face. After the ceremony, the reception was held in the school cafeteria. David watched with amazement as parents and teachers surrounded his boys, congratulating them and sharing stories about how Jerome and Kevin had impacted their own children's lives. "Mr. Rodriguez?" A young woman approached him holding a microphone and followed by a man with a camera. "I'm Jessica Chen from Channel 7 News. Could we interview you about your family's story? We're doing a piece about community transformation and overcoming prejudice." David looked around for his boys, who were surrounded by friends and admirers. "I'd prefer if you spoke with them," he said. "This is really their story." When Jerome and Kevin joined the interview, David stepped back to watch. He was struck by how articulate and thoughtful they had become, how they handled difficult questions about racism and adoption with grace and wisdom that surprised him. "The people who were mean to us at first weren't bad people," Kevin explained to the reporter. "They were just scared of something different. When they got to know us, everything changed." Jerome added, "My dad always told us that we had to prove people wrong with our actions, not our words, so we just tried to be good neighbors and good students. Eventually, that was enough." As the interview wrapped up, David felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Mrs. Patterson, his former social worker, who had been invited to tonight's celebration. "I've been working in adoption for 25 years, she said quietly, "and I've never seen a transformation like this. Not just in the boys, but in an entire community." She gestured toward the crowd. "Do you see Margaret Wellington over there? She's been volunteering with the county adoption agency for 2 years now, helping other families navigate the challenges you faced. And Mike Peterson started a mentorship program for kids in foster care." David looked around the room with new eyes. Linda Morrison was deep in conversation with Jerome about his plans for improving school lunch programs for students who couldn't afford them. Coach Williams was showing Kevin's grandmother, David's mother who had flown in for the ceremony, photos of Jerome's baseball trophies. "How did this happen?" David asked Mrs. Patterson. "You happened," she replied. "You and those boys showed this community what love really looks like. You didn't give up when things got tough, and you didn't respond to hatred with hatred. That changes people." The evening's biggest surprise came when Margaret Wellington approached the microphone during the open comment period. 5 years ago, she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I organized meetings to discuss the problem of the Rodriguez family moving into our neighborhood. I'm ashamed to admit that I led the charge to make them feel unwelcome." The room went completely quiet. David felt Jerome and Kevin tense beside him. Margaret continued, "I want to publicly apologize to David, Jerome, and Kevin for the pain I caused them. My actions were rooted in ignorance and fear, and there's no excuse for that." She paused, composing herself. But I also want to thank them. David's patience in the face of our hostility taught me about grace. Jerome's kindness to my daughter when she was struggling taught me about forgiveness. Kevin's beautiful voice in our church choir taught me about the power of bringing people together. Margaret looked directly at David's family. You didn't just change our neighborhood. You changed our hearts, and you made us better people. The applause that followed was different from any David had heard before. It was full of acknowledgement, regret, and genuine appreciation. After the reception, as they walked home under the streetlights of Maple Street, Kevin slipped his hand into David's. Dad, remember when you said we had to show them who we were? I remember, David replied. I think they finally see us, Kevin said with satisfaction. Jerome, walking ahead of them, turned around with a grin. Actually, I think they see themselves differently now, too. Back home, David tucked away the newspaper clippings and photos from the evening. The garage that had once been vandalized with hateful words now displayed a beautiful mural painted by the community art club, children of all colors playing together under a bright sun. As he got ready for bed, David reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when he wondered if he was doing the right thing by staying and fighting for their place in the community. But looking at his sons now, confident, accomplished, and kind young men who had learned that persistence and love could overcome almost any obstacle, David knew every difficult moment had been worth it. Jerome appeared in his doorway. Dad, Mrs. Patterson told me that you could have moved us away when things got bad. Why didn't you? David considered the question. Because running away wouldn't have solved anything. And because I wanted you and Kevin to know that you deserve to be anywhere you choose to be. I wanted you to see that you could change people's minds just by being yourselves. Jerome nodded thoughtfully. Ashley asked me today if I ever think about those people who were mean to us at first. What did you tell her? I told her I try not to be angry about it. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is that they learned from them and became better people. Jerome paused. Is that the right way to think about it? David smiled at his son, amazed once again by his wisdom and maturity. I think that's exactly the right way to think about it. As Jerome headed to his room, he called back, and Dad, I'm proud to be your son. I'm proud to be your dad too. David replied, his voice thick with emotion. Later, as David looked out his bedroom window at the peaceful street where they had once felt so unwelcome, he thought about all the families who might be facing similar struggles. The story would air on the news next week, and he hoped it might help other parents understand that love and patience could build bridges across any divide. The community that had once rejected his family now held them up as an example of what was possible when people opened their hearts to change, and David knew that Jerome and Kevin would carry those lessons forward, using their experiences to help others feel welcomed and valued wherever they went. On Maple Street, all the porch lights were on, welcoming anyone who needed a place to call home.